Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Divisional Round, and then there were 8 teams still in the mix to win the elusive Lombardi Trophy. I say elusive unless you're the Kansas City Chiefs trying to trace down your third piece of hardware in as many seasons. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host on this very fine program, the one, the only Payne Insider.
Way to incite the haters.
Hey, look, they had a week off. They were on a bye. I had to bring them out of the woodwork because we know everyone outside of Kansas City's Metroplex is rooting for the 7 teams that don't have that Chiefs logo on the side of their helmet.
Became that way down the stretch of Brady's career as well, right? I mean, people just want to see something different. And I think the, air quotes, players that we have involved in the playoffs, right? It'd be nice to see Josh Allen get one or Lamar get one to kind of cement what they've been doing over the last handful of years.
I think there's a ton of pressure for the other AFC quarterbacks, not named C.J. Stroud, whose runway still appears to be quite prosperous and rather long, but Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen will no doubt be judged not just by the merits of their outcome this weekend, but their ability to get their team to New Orleans. Before we get into the 4 games that we have on the schedule,
here we go.
I just want to get your quick take.
What happened last week?
Anything that stood out to you over Wild Card Weekend?
A lot of unders. My kind of football. Probably didn't have enough tied to some of the games. I think you could probably count on one hand how many times we've been dead wrong about the movement on the side of a game. Sure, maybe a half tick here, a half tick there, but I legitimately thought that Commanders total was going to close with a 4 in front. Instead, it steamed out to 52.5, and the group responsible for that is highly respected, so we never got to the window. Not quite happy about that. So aside from that, I mean, I think throughout the conversations we'll have about these games, we'll reflect on maybe some of the team performances from a week ago, and that always seems like the more efficient way to do it than sector out a segment of what transpired last week and try to think exactly what transpired among every single wild card game. But I thought, the Eagles probably played below expectation and got out of Dodge with a victory with a +4 in turnover differential. Houston was able to overcome the early barrage, holding the Chargers to 2 field goal drives, and when it felt like they were being dominated, they got the biggest drive of the season, that 99-yard confidence builder before the half. So I thought that paid dividends, and then you get smacked in the face with positive variance and pick 6 touchdowns. So we were very, I wouldn't say fortunate because the first half under was a dead nut winner, but we evaded the late game tomfoolery there, and I know there was another group that kind of chased our steam a little bit there and went under full game and took an unfortunate beat there. So nothing too crazy from that week. Sam Darnold certainly lost himself some money, but again, a game we'll get to here, I think, in a little bit with the Rams, and I just think maybe it's easier to talk about the games, at least from as we say, hey, this game, my mind kind of gravitates towards what transpired better there than trying to think about all of them at the same time.
Fair assessment, and we'll get into the games, break down the X's and O's, and cover them as in-depth as our listeners have come to expect. And things for the divisional round will start Saturday afternoon at Arrowhead, 4:30 Eastern. The Kansas City Chiefs, fresh off of the bye, double bye, triple bye, whatever we want to call it, laying more than a touchdown, 8.5, the consensus. There are plenty of 9s throughout the market as well. Total of 41.5 as they welcome in the Houston Texans, a team that they saw in this building a few short weeks ago. Chiefs won that ball game 27-19 back in Week 16. Unfortunately for the Texans, Tank Dell suffered a season-ending knee injury in the game. The Texans played that contest without a couple of their key contributors defensively that will be back in the fold. And Houston staring down a bit of history this weekend. 0-5 all-time on the road in the postseason, the only NFL franchise never to win a road playoff game, and 0-5 all-time in the divisional round, the only NFL team to never reach a conference championship. And if the Texans are going to have success, they're going to need to lean into their defense, which carried them across the finish line against the Los Angeles Chargers. We can go on and on about all of the accolades for the Kansas City Chiefs. We know they are no stranger to this particular role. Fortunately for them, this year, the road to the AFC Championship will run through Arrowhead. It's a team that hasn't been great covering numbers this season in terms of winning by margin. 0-6-1 against the spread as a 6+ point favorite this season, but they did, however, win all 7 of those games outright. We look back on the previous meeting against the Texans. Kansas City closed right around a 3.5 point favorite. For those folks who don't remember, it was all swirling about Patrick Mahomes' availability with that high ankle sprain. At one point that week, he even saw the Houston Texans installed as a short favorite. But Payne, if Houston is... What's up?
I said, I remember.
If Houston is going to go into Kansas City and pull off the outright upset, given what we've seen from this team offensively, do they have enough in the way of playmakers or difference makers to put Steve Spagnuolo's well-rested, well-schemed-up defense in a position of conflict? Or does it boil down to the other side, that it's all about the Texans' defense, keeping this game within one possession, hoping that for the first time in his career, Patrick Mahomes would falter in a late-game situation?
There's so many kind of wormholes you can go down when there's only 4 games, right? Because you can allocate more time to each of the matchups, and very difficult to do it for a full slate. But I think maybe the surface level conversations that we're going to hear on radio or TV is kind of regarding the Chiefs. Is it rust versus playoff offense? And that's kind of how I'm looking at this game. The Chiefs have kind of played their full offensive nucleus once since Christmas Day, is kind of what you were hinting at. I think maybe the other side of the coin is like the Chiefs' playoff offense seemingly finds another gear, and we know what Reed's track record is with extended time to prepare, and they're quite familiar with this divisional round game off the bye, and Mahomes has been really electric in this setting. I think maybe the more interesting conversation to me is, you mentioned the Chiefs struggling to cover some numbers. They started to do that a little bit down the stretch, and it's because we saw glimpses of what the offense could be in Week 16 and 17 with the return of Hollywood Brown. And they played the Texans. They played the Steelers, defenses that finished the regular season 3rd and 8th in schedule adjusted efficiency, and the Chiefs looked like they had more answers and were more efficient against that better competition than they had been against, I would say, on average, lesser competition throughout the course of the season. Hollywood Brown ran 34 routes with Mahomes at quarterback in those 2 games, targeted on 15 of them. So, I'd envision Brown being acclimated a little bit more if the game state requires it. You think last year back to the playoffs, Travis Kelce, who everyone thought was finished, turned back the clock in the Ravens game. He's going to benefit from extra time off. The biggest factor, though, is when I think about the Chiefs' offense and the Texans' defense, is how much pressure can D'Amico Ryans dial up. They're number 1 in pass rush win rate. You look at what he did to Justin Herbert last week. I mean, the Texans got pressure on 53% of dropbacks. Ryan schemed up 5 pressures that were just completely unblocked. Chargers' offensive line had no idea what was going on. So that's got to be the key here for the Texans to keep this game close. And we know Mahomes has been hit on more dropbacks this season than any in his career. The difference, though, I think is, if you're trying to correlate last week to this week, is the scheme. Patrick Mahomes just gets the ball out quicker than Justin Herbert. He throws shorter than Justin Herbert. Patrick Mahomes doesn't throw with play action as much. He's kind of seeing everything coming, where, Herbert had his back turned a lot last week. Andy Reid, I think if you listened to his presser this week. He was very praising of the Texans defense in terms of their speed, how they swarm the ball. And for the most part, they've been great defending short passes because of that speed. But in the first matchup, Week 16, that was not the case. Mahomes kind of torched the Texans on passes thrown within 5 air yards, 87% completion rate, 52% success, plus 0.4 EPA per attempt on those short throws. Now, the Texans played a ton of man coverage in that first matchup. I don't think they respected the Chiefs receiver group. Houston was also without their green dot and Aziz for that matchup. When you see the Texans in that game, when they played zone against Mahomes, kind of mixing and matching between cover 2 and cover 3, which is 47% of the time, Mahomes' yards per pass attempt dipped nearly 3 yards. So I would think you'd see more zone in this matchup for D'Amico. If I'm Mahomes, I'm probably pounding the slot there. That's where you want to attack the Texans' defense. It's where they're most vulnerable, whether it's with Kelsey kind of finding holes or Xavier Worthy. That's really been the vulnerability area for that Texans defense. 12% touchdown rate allowed to slot receivers, more than 8.5 yards per target allowed. Run game is interesting. We saw Fatukasi return for the Texans up front last week, had his best game of the season. Interested to see how the Chiefs elect to kind of attack the Texans on the ground. One of the gives to having a speed defense like D'Amico has is sometimes you can get bullied. Now, I thought the Texans defense in their own building with the crowd just roaring against a beat-up Chargers offensive line swarmed all game long, held the Chargers to a 29% rushing success rate, minus 0.34 EPA per rush. But when the Chiefs run this week, I think it'd kind of be wise of them to use more power concepts. That's, because the Texans defense is on the smaller side. Houston's 29th defending power runs, substantially better when they can use that quickness to shoot gaps against like inside zone where they're top 5 in the league defending those run types. To me, like, pressure both sides is really where this game is going to be decided. What do you make offensively for the Texans? I mean, I think you see 32 on the scoreboard last week and think C.J. Stroud and Bobby Slowick figured it out.
They didn't figure a damn thing out. I mean, you want to talk about butterfly effect for the Houston Texans offense. I'm still convinced that C.J. Stroud should have been called for intentional grounding. That allowed that drive to continue to go on. It's a broken snap, and from that point, they played downhill a bit. But this was a Chargers defense that we had broken down in great detail multiple times, and every time they stepped up in class, they left something to be desired. For Houston to be successful, if they get into known passing situations, it's a real problem because that offense really didn't start to click, and I use that term tongue-in-cheek, until Joe Mixon got going on the ground, and he was an absolute non-factor for the first 30 minutes of football.
So, again, you see the 32 on the scoreboard, and you're like, CJ and Bobby figured it out. And, I referenced that 99-yard touchdown drive before the half, and that was monumental, right? It built some confidence, but the Texans defense scored 9 points. They helped set up a field goal drive where the Texans gained 1 yard before kicking the field goal. 38% success rate for the Texans offense first 3 quarters. Good for 10th out of 12 wild card offenses. Houston, to your point, and you said it perfectly, couldn't really run it. Turned it over 3 times. Now, you think about this, it's a dome offense going outdoors, and what looks to be, in the teens temperature-wise. Gusts have come down a little bit since earlier in the week, but still potentially in that 20-mile-an-hour range. The Chiefs are rested, and it sounds like they're healthier. But we did see a change in the Texans' philosophy on offense. Bobby Slowick dialed up pass on 73% of early downs in the first half. That was something that was a little bit surprising. The Texans receivers did a nice job finding holes in the Chargers secondary. Tons of run after the catch. 43% of Stroud's yards came after the catch last week. There's a few things that kind of stand out, and I said pressure being the key. The Texans have been giving up gobs of it all season. Spags got to Stroud on 49% of dropbacks. Week 16, sacked him twice, picked him off with pressure. Stroud was terrible, man. Just completed 36% of his throws in that game under duress. But I kind of go back to that philosophy change, and you were talking about third downs. It has to be the same thing this week for the Texans offense. Because if you look at the season-long data, Bobby Slowick's offense faces third down at the 8th highest rate. Very little bypassing of third down. And you look at the talent, right? When Nico is the only true difference maker, the guy that can consistently be the only factor who can win his one-on-one matchup on third and obvious, it's why the Texans are 30th in converting third downs. And so, we saw them get rid of Deontay Johnson, and I understand he's a little bit of a headache. But in terms of talent, he was probably their number 2 option.
He had his one catch.
And
he has tremendous contributions for the Texans offensively.
He could have used 2. Utah, give me 2. And, if the Texans with that offensive line are in third down and Spags can fire up the exotic blitz packages, right? And you would expect that with extra prep. Stroud's probably going to be running for his life. So I think it's vital the Texans throw on their terms rather than having it dictated to them on third down. They're going to have to come out and throw here. And you can then set up run with the pass. So would highly encourage Slowick to go that route again. If you are going to run power concepts as well, KC's top 10 defending outside zone, which the Texans like to run, but they're well below average defending some of those power runs. That's kind of how I would go about this. I think it's also interesting to see what version of the Chiefs defense we get this week. And that's probably going to determine how far this run can go again this season, because first 7 weeks, easily a top 10 defense. And we were kind of at the forefront of the Jalen Watson value when he went down with that ankle injury. We know what Trent McDuffie is, but who's the guy opposite him? Who's the long-armed, physical outside corner opposite McDuffie that would fill that void of L'Jarius Sneed? We thought it was going to be Joshua Williams with how his 2023 season ended, but it ended up being Jalen Watson. Watson was one of the stickiest corners the first 7 weeks based on separation allowed. But if once he went down, you look from week 8 onward, the Chiefs' defense has been below average in EPA per play allowed. Jalen Watson returned to practice this week, got in a full Tuesday, Wednesday. I do not think we see a full workload. I
was going to say, judging by what we saw from the Bucs corners that returned from injury last weekend, asking him to be at 100% right away feels like a reach.
Yeah. Now, you're getting in fulls, but I envision him kind of working his way back into game shape. So I would envision he gets some snaps. At the same time, though, we've seen Joshua Williams kind of regain confidence late in the season, that same confidence that he had last year. 1 catch allowed for 7 yards on 4 targets in his last 54 coverage snaps over 2 games. So, it's very possible there's a situation here where you get the offensive uptick from the Chiefs while the defense trends closer to how it played the first 7 weeks, and I think that's probably pretty scary.
It should be a scary thought for everybody else in the AFC, not just named the Houston Texans. If the Chiefs get through this game unscathed and move into an AFC championship game against the winner of the Ravens and Bills, a game we'll preview a little bit later in the program. Payne, the number 1 seed on the NFC side is the Detroit Lions for the first time in franchise history, and they enter the divisional round as a massive 9.5 point favorite as they'll welcome in the upstart Commanders, a team that exceeded everyone's wildest expectations coming into the year. Largest total of this round at 55.5. These were the only 2 teams with a touchdown or field goal on 50+% of their drives during the regular season. Both of these teams ranked top 4 in 4th down conversions this season, including the playoffs. The Lions have gone for it on 4th down 33 times this season, 4th most in the NFL, and were successful at about a 2/3 percentage clip. Washington had the highest success rate on 4th down this regular season and is an unsustainable mark well north of 80%. We're 3 of 5 on 4th down in their win over Tampa Bay in the wild card. Got that to pay dividends, forcing the critical turnover when Tampa was backed up. 8-point underdogs have not fared all that well with a robust 0-14 straight-up record in the past 14 NFL playoff games. The last winner was back in 2019 when the Titans defeated the number 1 Ravens seed in the divisional round. The Commanders playing with a bit of house money, there's no doubt about it, behind a rookie quarterback in Jayden Daniels. The Lions with a lot more pressure on them to try and get this thing across the finish line and represent the NFC down there in New Orleans. If the Lions do indeed make the Super Bowl, they would not play a game outdoors this entire postseason. The Lions were victorious in 12 games played inside this year, most by any team since the merger, passing the 1998 Falcons, who had 11 such victories. Credit the Lions, this trajectory has gone only one direction. 13-1 back in 2021 to 15-2 in 2024, the only team in NFL history to increase their win total by 3+ wins in 3 straight seasons. Payne, there are so many different ways to go, whether it's Jayden Daniels and some of his limited weaponry and his fourth down magic against a Lions defense that was trending poorly until the regular season finale against the Vikings, but you and I both discussed off air. Maybe we have to temper some of those expectations about that Lions defensive performance against Minnesota Week 18, given what we saw from the Vikings this past Monday night against the Rams. But let's start on that side of the ball with the Lions defense getting a little bit healthier against a Commanders offense that we've seen kind of dance between the raindrops and give this team an opportunity to win 7 games on the final play already this season.
Yeah, generally speaking, there's not much new to uncover about the Commanders that we haven't touched on in recent weeks, especially heading into the Buccaneers game. And this is a great run for that fan base, right? They've been starved. Jaden's becoming that city's second son, and they don't care how the wins come, but
they don't ask you how, Payne. They just ask you how many.
Yeah, and that's fine from a fan perspective, from an organization perspective. It's not fine for what we're attempting to do here when, the last 5 games I've won on the final play. I just don't know how that continues. And, we mentioned variance downs, and I think we discussed how poor Jayden had been down the stretch early in games, particularly the first 3 quarters. He was better in that regard against a downtrending Buccaneers defense who hadn't played a soul out of their bye. And to your point, I think we're rushing some guys back in the secondary because how impactful that game was, right? It's the biggest game of the season, so guys are going to go at 70%. But even last week, if you look at early downs, the first 3 quarters, the Commanders' offense delivered a 43% success rate. Late downs, all quarters, 59%. For the entire season, Washington's generated the most EPA on 4th downs of any offense in the NFL, gravitating more towards a historical level on 4th down. So I know a lot of people will be like, well, Jayden Daniels can run, and that's why, yeah, to a degree. We've also seen other mobile quarterbacks have lots of success, and what Jaden's doing, what Washington's doing on 4th down in terms of EPA generated is multiple deviations above even the most mobile quarterbacks at their peak. I think the other area where there was variance last week was that Jayden was pressured 15 times, and his sack avoidance was absolutely elite. Sacked just 1 time. That's a metric that typically isn't stable. And you can go back to Jaden's time at LSU to see what I mean. And you can even go back to earlier this season. Now, defensively, I think, what Jayden and the Commanders are going to see from the Lions this week is pretty straightforward. It's going to be man coverage. It's going to be blitz. There'll be a sprinkle of cover 2 in there. I think our belief in-house and the metrics that we think are most important don't value the Lions defense as a top 5 unit, like some of the surface level efficiency data that's publicly available would suggest. And, after watching the moment prove to be too large for Sam Darnold again in the wild card round, suddenly my mind values Detroit's defensive effort there Week 18 against Minnesota less than the initial instinct. And then when you marry that with the all-22, boy, Vikings receivers were open. Sam was just kind of unwilling to fire, and when he did, 57% adjusted accuracy with 8 overthrows. So there was a lot of missed opportunities for that Vikings offense against the Lions. So I think there's probably some variance with this matchup because I expect Detroit to continue playing aggressive with high rates of man coverage. They're number 1 in that regard in the league. Their high blitz rates. But Aaron Glenn's had 2 weeks to throw in some wrinkles, and the Commanders' offense has had 6 days to prepare for this. So I do think there's an edge there. We did see a dip in Jayden Daniels' passing efficiency against man coverage this season, 15% drop in completion rate, yards per pass attempt, bottom 10 in the league. And when the first read wasn't there, Jaden had a tendency to kind of hold the ball against man coverage, and he took a sack on nearly 13% of dropbacks. That was 34th among qualifying quarterbacks. But where that variance lies is in the boom plays, right? Detroit's given up the most rushing yards to quarterbacks. So when you play man against a mobile quarterback, there's going to be some rush lanes. Defenders in the secondary are going to have their backs to Jaden at times. And, Jaden leads the league in scramble rate against man coverage. Took off on 12% of snaps when he sees man. When Jaden, was able to kind of pick out the open guy versus man coverage, he makes the defense pay. Touchdown rate was 7.5% higher than it was against zone. So completion rate and yards per pass attempt down, but the splash plays were there, and that creates some variance. So, we know Aaron Glenn likes to blitz. He's actually upped that rate down the stretch as well. He blitzed Sam Darnold on 47% of dropbacks, blitzed Purdy 53% of the time in Week 17. Caleb was blitzed 44%, Josh Allen 49%, Jordan Love more than 58%. So since Week 14, Aaron Glenn's basically gone kamikaze mode, which I don't necessarily disagree with when you're riddled with injuries, right? You want to kind of, hey, let's get to the quarterback, let's make some negative plays here in hopes that helps us get off the field, because if you're just going to sit back and zone, you're going to get picked apart. Jaden, as I mentioned, handled the Bucs blitz pretty well. Top 15 quarterback in some of the most meaningful metrics against the blitz this season. His sack avoidance last week against Tampa was not normal, considering, again, his time at LSU. And if you look this season, his sack rate against the blitz was 30th among qualifying quarterbacks. So we sometimes, his mobility in a straight line is fantastic, and he's going to avoid sacks. And again, last week, I think he ran pretty hot with that. But yeah, and maybe that continues. It just hasn't been the case last year at LSU or earlier this season. I'm not sure how balanced the Commanders' ground game will be.
What ground game is the question I have to ask you? Other than Jay Daniels, it's been non-existent the last couple weeks of Brian Robinson, looking like the back we thought he was going to be coming into the league.
Yeah, they were a little bit more efficient running it earlier in the season, struggled a little bit down the stretch. The Lions have been pretty good stopping the run, 6th in success rate allowed since Week 10. The Commanders run a lot of inside zone. Detroit ranks 6th defending that run type as well. So, Jaden's going to have to kind of construct the masterpiece here, because I think they'll have to keep pace to cover this number. I don't really think Dan Quinn and the Commanders' defense stand much of a chance here unless they just blitz to high heavens and they perfectly execute it and they rattle Goff. But Goff is an average quarterback so far this season when he's blitzed. He's the number 1 QB in the league when he's not. And I think the Commanders' defense is wildly overrated. They've faced the second easiest schedule of passing offenses. This is going to be a shock to their system. If you look since Week 7, the Commanders have faced quarterbacks like Caleb Williams, Daniel Jones, Cooper Rush, Will Levis, Spencer Rattler, Jake Haener, Kenny Pickett, Trey
That's
Lance,
an elite level of
Penix,
opposing pivots.
Penix, and Andy Dalton. And so now you get the number 1 passing attack in a dome on a fast track with Ben Johnson having 2 weeks to prepare. You look at the matchup, too. The Commanders play the 6th highest rate of man coverage this season. They've upped their rate of man on both early downs and third downs since Week 12. Jared Goff against man, number 1 in EPA per dropback, number 1 completion rate, number 1 in touchdown percentage, number 1 in first downs obtained per dropback. And Goff's turnover-worthy play rate shrinks against man coverage as well. Against the run, Detroit likes to use outside zone, right? They want Gibbs to kind of create explosives, getting his speed to the outside. Washington, 28th defending outside zone. So I think about the step up in class Washington's defense is taking here and doing it on a short week while Ben Johnson's had 2 weeks on top of the coverage Washington uses most is what Goff thrives against, and the run types the Lions like Washington has struggled the most against. So it's going to be on Jaden and the Washington offense to keep pace with the Lions offense in this one.
This total, historically high. We don't typically see numbers like this in the playoffs. Just kind of wanted to get your take on it, since it is a discussion point throughout mainstream media in terms of what it takes to go over a number this high, and what it means as a reflection of these two teams. When we look elsewhere in the market, it's more than a field goal higher than the next highest total at 51.5 being played between the Bills and Ravens.
Yeah, it really comes down to what you think Detroit's defense is, right? Because if Washington scoring, it means Detroit's offense is going to have to keep pushing, in my mind. Pure model, we didn't come anywhere close to 55.5, 56. We have not gone under, though, because there is that element where it can get loose a little bit. But, if you have a situation where Detroit's the side and their defense is playing closer to the level that they did in Week 18, and that's not make-believe, then you could certainly see a 31-17 type game here. Washington is going to, I think, try to shorten this game. And if the fourth down variance continues to be great for Washington, then maybe they can keep this within the number and hang some points. But suddenly you get a couple of those fourth down stops, and Detroit's getting extra possessions. This also has a chance to get ugly.
It is always interesting. Dan Campbell has shown an ability to step on that accelerator and create a little bit of margin. We know Ben Johnson's name bandied about for a lot of the higher profile head coaching jobs that are out there. I'm sure he would love to put another data point on there, cement that with a comfortable 30-plus point explosion against a very vulnerable Washington Commanders defense.
I don't think he needs it.
No, I mean, look.
I think he's got his pick of the litter,
at this point, it's just a question of him going into the right situation, making sure the dollars are where they need to be, and deciding it's finally time for him to take over a franchise.
There was a conversation where, it's almost some of the college conversation now. Do you want to live a normal life? And it's not normal as an offensive coordinator, right? You're still in the office a ton. But do you want to be the highest paid offensive coordinator, make $4.5 million a year, and not deal with the whole headaches of running the ship, right, to make 10? It's an interesting conversation to have. Now, I do think Ben Johnson's exit would be smart, because I just don't know if you can keep a top 5 offensive line intact while all of the young guys are going to want to get paid simultaneously, like Gibbs and Laporta and JMO are all going to probably need contracts around the same time. I don't know if you can keep that nucleus all together. So I think that's a little bit of a factor as well in his mind. But it'll be interesting to see if the right opportunity comes up, because he passed up this Washington job last year.
Yeah, there's some weird stories there. I have to try and find the article that circulated. I'll send it to you if I can see it, about Johnson saying some different things about wanting more input with a quarterback, that Washington pretty much said that they had already decided they were going to take Jaden Daniels at number 2. So an interesting side story leading up to this game in terms of how things will unfold there. So you always wonder, just more narrative-based than some of the X's and O's, exactly what transpires. Two opponents that are unfamiliar with each other, not having played with the current constructs of these rosters, unlike some of these other teams that will be renewing acquaintances, at least on some level. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board podcast related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And as we mentioned last week, breaking down the NFL and the college football playoff games, you don't have to wait long for a national championship breakdown between the Ohio State Buckeyes on one sideline and Brad Powers' beloved Notre Dame Fighting Irish on the other. That podcast will be available for you on Friday leading into the weekend. So plenty of NFL and college football coverage to get you taken care of. But 2 games still left to go here, Payne, as we shift focus from Saturday into the Sunday portion of the divisional round schedule. The Philadelphia Eagles at home at Lincoln Financial Field to welcome in the Rams on a short week. It's Philadelphia, 6-point favorite in this game. Total pretty much 44 painted across the board. There are a couple of 43.5s. There are some 44.5s, depending on where you fall on this side of the total. These two teams have been two of the better teams since their respective bye weeks. Combined record of 23-4. The Rams going 10-3 down the stretch. Philadelphia 13-1. The Eagles, they boast the youngest defense in the NFL as of earlier this week, an average age of 25 years, 211 days. The Rams not exactly senior statesmen either, as they have the 3rd youngest defense in the league. But what is notable for the Rams, they spent the lowest amount of cap space on that stop unit that's coming of age before our very eyes. Two meetings between Sean McVay and Nick Sirianni dominated by the Eagles. The Eagles' defense has kind of made the Rams somewhat one-dimensional. Most notable in those games, the Rams have dominated time of possession. We saw that earlier this year, nearly 36 minutes per game, and it was Saquon Barkley going for 200-plus, well over that. The Rams 0 of 8 on third down. Matthew Stafford sacked 5 times in Sunday Night Football. Rams looking to become the third team to make the conference championship game after a 1-4 start, something that hasn't been accomplished since 2002. Matthew Stafford, long struggling as an underdog. He's kind of changed that storyline with his performance this season. Did it a couple of days ago, pulling the outright upset as a 2.5-point pup against the Minnesota Vikings. Meanwhile, for the Eagles, second team since 1970 with the NFL's rushing title winner and number 1 total defense. The Dallas Cowboys back in 1992 went on to win the Super Bowl, the other franchise with that distinction. And the Eagles, the first team to allow 10 or fewer points in 3 straight home playoff games, going all the way back to the early 2000s. Payne, we mentioned the Houston Texans offense looking like a little bit of smoke and mirrors despite hanging 30-plus on the Chargers in their win last weekend during the wild card round. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Rams, they looked great on their opening drive against the Minnesota Vikings. The script appeared to be flawless. They were aided by a 4th-and-1 conversion due to a defensive penalty. You dig into some of the Rams' offensive numbers, and while they weren't pushed, they don't leave you brimming with a ton of confidence, but they did shut it down in the second half, so keep that in mind. But the Rams offensively, led by a consummate veteran of Matthew Stafford, who already has a piece of jewelry in his trophy case against a Philadelphia defense that has been outstanding, but an Eagles defense that goes into battle this weekend without a key contributor after losing Nakobe Dean for the season with the patella tendon injury.
Arguably the toughest game of the week for me. The Eagles had the worst passing performance of any wild card winner. Jalen Hurts looked like he was in a fog after 21 days off, and some of his pressers since the concussion against Washington have been flat out weird, maybe even concerning to some degree. You look at Hurts, who's successful on less than 35% of his passes. When he took off and ran, he was avoiding any and all contact. Saquon was the most valuable accumulator last weekend, but the yards, they added up, but he only had 33% rushing success rate for the Philly offense, and they won that game being +4 in turnover differential. The Rams, two things seem, I would say, somewhat clear, is their playoff rating is likely higher than their regular season rating due to pedigree, Super Bowl winning coach and quarterback, and I think that requires a little bit of a manual bump, and then you have some young guys on the defense that are kind of ascending simultaneously. I also thought the Vikings were the perfect matchup for Sean McVay, and we kind of had that feeling going into the game, and it kept us off the Vikings, fortunately. McVay loves to use motion, right? Motion helps identify defense's intention before the play, and Brian Flores clearly didn't learn his lesson and blitzed Matthew Stafford on 69% of dropbacks Monday night. Stafford was 14 for 18 with 2 touchdowns against the blitz. Motion, right? Plus a quick release, plus you have savvy receivers able to find holes in the zone and kind of sit down is exactly the opposite way of like how you would want to defend the Rams offense, right? Blitzing and playing zone. It just makes very little sense. We said it beforehand. Very first play of the game, Puka Nacua, who runs 4.6, gets free release off the line. He keeps pushing his route down the field because Minnesota was in deep zone. It was a layup for 27 yards. Troy Aikman makes a comment. The Vikings were trying to disguise their coverage there. How about attempting to actually cover?
Well, they disguised their coverage. They disguised it for their own defensive backs.
Yes. Hold on. Ooh, we're in the middle of something here. Let me... I got to get down on something.
All right, no problem. So,
hold on.
We'll filibuster. We'll filibuster a little bit as you continue to go through this. So, your point about Matthew Stafford and kind of bumping the Rams up, I think is worth noting. And I do have to give credit to the source on this particular nugget. That comes from a great article that Evan Abrams did on Action Network talking about Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. Those quarterbacks, Payne, 62, 25, and 2 against the spread, a 71% success rate as an underdog in the playoffs. those quarterbacks, when they're a dog before winning the Super Bowl ring, 25-8 against the number, but even after accomplishing that feat, 37-17-2, including 15-5 ATS since the 2018 playoffs. So you can understand why the Rams come in with a little bit of a different cachet, some of that pedigree that you alluded to, and knowing that even on a short week, Sean McVay's teams have been outstanding. So you try and figure out if the Rams are able to replicate that offensive game plan that we saw on Monday night against the Minnesota Vikings, or if things are going to be a little bit different with their bells and whistles, McVay on a short week trying to figure out an attack plan to go after a Vic Fangio. And I think that in and of itself becomes the most fascinating chess match, knowing these teams played earlier this year, but they're not exactly in the same current form as Philadelphia's defense has been on the ascent. The Rams offense looks a little bit different, but maybe most notably the Rams defense doing things differently with their ability to generate a pass rush against an Eagles offense that has struggled to kind of find a little bit of an identity during that time period.
I appreciate that. So we got the bio. I sent you a note.
Okay.
There.
Sounds good. Now you will take the time while I begin to shop around.
So, Matthew Stafford has graded out 17th among 43 quarterbacks when he's blitzed this season. His actual EPA and success rate metrics are better than that. And, you have to get natural pressure on Stafford. That's when he's been horrific this season. So effectively, that is the way to kind of defend him, and we didn't see that at all from Minnesota for whatever reason. And, Brian Flores came out and did his presser last week ahead of the game and was like, Puka Nacua, we just didn't expect him to play. That was the reason we weren't prepared, and it was a short week, and suddenly, did the same exact thing.
Hold on.
I wasn't quite sure how
Flores may not have expected Tyler Higbee to play, given what he was able to do before leaving the game in the most recent installment between those two teams.
So it's like it's very difficult to like how you price the Rams, because you probably do a slight bump up manual adjustment for playoff time based upon the pedigree. But then it's like they had the perfect matchup last week. So do you really want to buy them at? It's just difficult. And then you think about the other side, and you have a Philly team that lost the adjusted box score but won the game because of 4 turnovers. But then it's the Rams on a short week, and they're traveling across the country, and they're still dealing with some chaos back home, and had a higher ceiling performance because of the perfect matchup. You mentioned the first go-around Week 12. This is a rematch from that, and it's just like, what adjustments does Chris Shula make to help slow down the Eagles' ground game? And I know that's a name that has certainly skyrocketed up the list of importance since Monday night in terms of coordinators who might, at least at minimum, get some interviews, some head coaching looks. We'll see. I think maybe, if he comes up with another game plan here that keeps his momentum going forward, and then he might actually truly get a look. But, unless he comes up with a plan here to stop Saquon in this Eagles ground game, I think maybe that gets zapped back into reality. And you look in that Week 12 matchup, Saquon, 255 yards rather on 26 carries, had 270-yard explosives, added another 47 yards on 4 catches. All told, the Eagles were plus 0.31 EPA per rush, 48% success rate on the ground. And you just kind of think about what has to happen here, because the Rams like to play 2 high safeties. Right? So light boxes. Not really the formula for stopping a ground game with an elite offensive line, an elite running back, and an offense that usually, even against base defenses, have the box advantage because it's quarterback's mobility creating like a +1 advantage. So, past the pure numbers advantage in the box Philly's going to have, like Chris Shula has to adapt here, right? And the run types Philly likes to use, like counter. The Rams have struggled to defend that run type. Eagles use the second highest rate of counter in the league. Rams are 31st defending counter runs. And so, if the Rams can't stop the run enough times, then they're not going to have the chance to see if Jalen Hurts can throw the football. And that's the key to this. Monday night, to me, when I talked about that peak performance, was a little bit of an anomaly, right? The Rams pressured Sam Darnold on 54% of dropbacks, and they only blitzed 18% of the time to do that. So if you can get pressure without leaving yourself exposed, it's what every defensive coordinator on earth dies for. It's probably not going to happen here, right? But you look at how the Rams have kind of trended. Yes, the defense has been better. We talked off air. Some of it's schedule aided. They really hadn't been generating a ton of pressure leading up to Monday night, 24% the final 3 games of the season. Since Week 9, the Rams are 28th generating pressure. The Eagles' O-line 6th in pass block win rate. But you have to figure out a way, if you're Shula, to get the Eagles in passing down situations. And when you do, you have to generate pressure because Jalen Hurts and that Eagles offense just falls off a cliff. Jalen Hurts, extremely sensitive to pressure. Completion rate dips 34%. Yards per pass attempt drops nearly 4.5 yards when under pressure. The Rams have to force the Eagles out of that conservative nature, right? They're clearly trying to ride their O-line and Saquon while not messing things up for Vic Fangio's defense. Speaking of which, that's maybe the interesting part of this matchup is that Vic Fangio is going to be without his green dot linebacker, Nakobe Dean, who was carted off last week with the knee injury. I think it's an interesting conversation because the Rams' offense hadn't really been playing at peak down the stretch, right? They got Puka back against the Vikings, and we just kind of assumed, okay, now this offense is just going to soar, right? They're going to get back to being that top 5 offense. Everyone's healthy. They just did this against, at the time, the number 1 defense in the league in Minnesota. 12th in EPA per play from week 10 through 17. Obviously, we yank out week 18 where the starters don't play. There's going to be a lot of give and take here, right? Motion rates help. Play action helps. Rams use play action at the league's highest rate. The Eagles' defense is the 4th most sensitive to play action, and now you don't have your organizer in the middle with Dean. But I think this will be a wildly different approach, right? Flores was blitz happy. Vic Fangio is not. Eagles blitz the lowest rate in the league. They do a good job getting natural pressure, top 10 in pass rush win rate. We'll have to keep our eyes on the Rams left tackle, Alaric Jackson, who left Monday night's game with the chest injury. Did not practice earlier in the week. Stafford has been a below-average quarterback when he's not blitzed. He's been horrific when facing natural pressure. The Rams will likely live in 3 wide receiver sets, especially if Higbee can't go. Number 2 rate of 11 personnel usage in the NFL. The Eagles, number 1, defending throws from 3 wide receiver sets this season. So it'll be interesting to see how the Rams elect to attack, if they can actually attack with multiple tight ends if Higbee can't go. I don't know if they have enough talent in that room to feel comfortable doing that. If I'm McVay looking at the run game, I'd be using more outside zone runs. Eagles are 23rd defending those run types, top 5 defending man concept runs, which the Rams use the most. So I'd maybe flip that around and use more outside zone there with Kyren Williams. I've heard both sides of this game, and that's somewhat rare considering we're not around the 3 or 7. If you're someone that believes the playoff version of the Rams have another gear and you're not sure what's going on with Hurts, I get it, right? There's some 6.5 out in the market. Maybe you're playing the waiting game in hopes that you can get 7 on a bye. If you're someone relying on priors and saying, hey, the Rams are what the Rams are, we're not giving them the playoff bump, and the Eagles played their worst game possible and still won, and we think Jalen Hurts is fine. It was just a little rust, and the Rams are coming off their Mona Lisa. There's only one direction to go from there, and it's a short week, and they're still dealing with distractions, and it's a dome team from the West Coast. It's going to be playing in some frigid weather, and then you want to lay it. So there's a little bit of a battle on this game, and I think it's one of the more telling battles as opposed to last week where we're saying, hey, conflicting opinions on the Buccaneers-Commanders game. The difference is the battle happened on both sides of the 3, which just makes sense. Here, it's around a secondary key. It's not a 3 or 7, so it's pretty telling, the difference of opinions, and I tried to spell out on why that's happening.
Well, and the other thing about this, too, is you haven't really seen any movement. I mean, you saw a couple of 5.5s that were there that became 6s. You do see 1 6.5 at a former podcast sponsor right now, but for the most part, the number is painted across the board. So whoever has market influence either hasn't fully tipped their hand in their position in terms of where this game will go, or books feel comfortable going, you know what, we don't need to go to 6.5 because we don't need the dog money, and we go to 5.5, we know we'll get the favorite money. We're going to sit here right on a secondary key number. and allow this to create the ultimate two-way balanced action for a game as well. Total has seen a little bit of money when you get down to 43.5. We'll see where that goes. But this game feels like it is priced correctly, both side and total. Interesting to see what'll transpire from now on Thursday until kickoff on this game early on Sunday, and how Mother Nature has her say and how this game will unfold. Also keep in mind, when we look back to the prior data point, I know we referenced it between the Ravens and Steelers, how the number changed from 6.5, 7 to 10. That game was played in the same venue. Earlier in the show, we broke down Kansas City and Houston. That game was played in Week 16, went from a 3.5 now out to 8.5. This was a game that we saw a little bit longer ago on Sunday Night Football. I think it was Week 12, where it was the Philadelphia Eagles closing. We'll call it minus 3.25 against the Rams. Here we are. You back out 1.5 points of home field advantage there at SoFi. You tack on 1.5, which may be a little bit light for Lincoln Financial, and kind of how we've landed at 6 as both teams have trended up. Final game of the weekend, though, Payne, and arguably the crown jewel under normal circumstances, could be considered an AFC championship caliber matchup between two guys vying for the MVP, and one has a chance to land a final salvo, although it has absolutely no bearing on who will take home that regular season hardware. Sees the Baltimore Ravens head to Orchard Park, New York to take on the Buffalo Bills. Baltimore now a modest 1-point road favorite in the game after opening a 1.5 point pup. Total largely unchanged, 51.5 on the opener, pretty much 51.5s painted across the board. This will mark the first ever playoff matchup between quarterbacks with 40-plus total touchdowns on the season and fewer than 10 turnovers during the regular season. Lamar Jackson, a .745 winning percentage. Josh Allen, .691, have the best two records by any quarterbacks in the Super Bowl era without a single Super Bowl start, with a minimum of 50 starts under their belts. The Bills and Ravens have combined for 130 touchdowns this season, the most touchdowns entering a playoff matchup all time. They've combined for 19 turnovers this season, the fewest turnovers entering a playoff matchup all time. We've seen the Bills consistently win the turnover battle week after week after week. The Ravens ride a 5-game winning streak, all by 14-plus points, including the postseason, into this matchup. It's the longest such streak by any team since the Ravens back in 2019. First meeting between these teams, the Ravens, they left absolutely no doubt on Sunday Night Football, scored a touchdown in each of their first 3 drives, jumped out to a 21-3 lead. Bills played the game down some key components on their defense who will be available this week: Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, and Teron Johnson. Derrick Henry left that game with a season-high 199 rushing yards, with 150 of those coming on 3 explosives, with an 87-yard burst, 25 and 38. The Ravens outrushed the Bills 271-81 in that game, with the Ravens finishing with an average of 5.2 yards before contact per rushing attempt, where Buffalo has held their opponents to less than 1.5 yards of that variety during the season. Ravens-Bills, Payne, we have elite quarterback play on both sides, a defense trending up recently in the form of the Baltimore Ravens. Questions about the availability of Zay Flowers, although I'll say it, I think he is a long shot to be out there. And a Buffalo team that has kind of been chameleon-like in the way they've gone about approaching their offensive philosophies, leaning into the ground game, but may need to change some of their stance defensively to sell out, stop the run, and force playoff Lamar to beat him with his arm.
Kellen Moore getting a little interview action there with the old Cowboys.
I was surprised to see him listed as the second favorite on the board. I thought he should have been the favorite ahead of Deion Sanders, quite honestly. Old Deion there at minus 105.
A lot of people should have been the favorite.
What'd you say?
A lot of people should have been the favorite over Deion there.
Well, hey, betting markets, they don't always tell the full story.
I'm really looking forward to the cat and mouse between Monken and McDermott here. You mentioned some of the things that transpired in that Week 4 matchup, and the Ravens just ran right over Buffalo. You mentioned some of the before contact numbers. It led to a 52% rushing success rate in non-garbage time, plus 0.17 EPA per rush full game. Now, Bills fans will say, hey, we were without Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard and Ty Johnson for that game, and no doubt, like those 3 being available this Sunday helps. But to me, it's more about game plan and scheme. And if I trusted the game plan and schemes, I would have probably a larger stance on this game. I just don't have a massive one. Sean McDermott has to throw a curveball here. on almost both sides of the ball, right? And I think you're right in Zay Flowers. This is the matchup where Zay Flowers not being available allows McDermott's curveball to work better, actually, right? Last week without Zay, the Ravens used heavy personnel on 89% of snaps. We figured Baltimore would lean on more 2 tight end sets. Every professional bettor did. They attacked, the tight end position likely, in the prop market. Everything was set up for heavier sets there. That matchup, though, was actually the way you wanted to attack Pittsburgh in general, even if Zay Flowers was available or not, because the Steelers had been so poor defending 2 tight end sets. The Bills' defense is the inverse. Buffalo is actually dead last, defending 11 personnel passes since Week 9, top 10 defending passes from heavy formations over that same stretch. We've also seen McDermott, and this is a little surprising, willing to increase his rate of man coverage down the stretch because of the confidence he has in Christian Benford. Benford's allowing about 6 yards per target. The Bills have upped their rate of man coverage by about 10% since Week 16. Now, even with the updated rate of man coverage, they still only use it about 40%. It needs to be more, right? That should be the goal because Lamar has the highest rating of any quarterback against zone this season at 121. He is feasted on zone. So you want to go more man. That also probably, helps move defenders closer to the line of scrimmage. If Buffalo's going to sit in too high with a light box and a defensive line that averages about 280 pounds, they're just going to get run over here again. Lamar's going to find the holes in the zone, especially since Buffalo doesn't get much pressure as it is. So Buffalo's got to play more man coverage. They've got to load the box. Buffalo has been exponentially worse defending heavy personnel runs, 21st in EPA per rush allowed versus 2 tight end sets, top 5 defending runs from 11. So again, more man, force a Zayless Ravens offense to beat them with other receivers and then allocate more guys to the box. That seems pretty straightforward. I don't really want to beat a dead horse with Buffalo's offense and piss Bills Mafia fans, guys. They bought a Ferrari, right, in Josh Allen, and they're basically just running him around town to pick up groceries, and they're not letting him open it up on the highway.
Sounds like your day-to-day.
We're not doing this. One way to lessen the, I think, blow of the Ravens' rush attack is to get out and build a lead, right? Force Lamar to throw without Zay against more man coverage. And let's just say Zay shocks us all and he plays. If you look at the history of guys with this injury, there's very few that come back in 2 weeks. And when they do come back, their ability is decreased at exponential
Oh, it's
rates.
going to give you
so
opportunity
even if he was
bet
to
against it because if he's out there in the frigid temperatures, ain't exactly going to be ideal.
Yeah. And so, the goal should be building a lead here for Buffalo. And if Buffalo wants to run it, it'd be much smarter to do it from 3 wide receiver sets. And they typically want to play bully ball, right? They want to be the biggest man in the ring. They want to bring out that 6th offensive lineman, which they do more than anybody else in the league. But Baltimore's far worse defending runs from 11 than they are heavy. But if Baltimore's going to come, Buffalo's going to come out and try to play bully and go heavy and run on early downs, I don't know how effective that's going to be. The Ravens are only allowing 31% of early down runs the first 3 quarters to great successful. That's tied for number 1 in the NFL with the Chiefs. We saw the Ravens come out. They used a ton of zone coverage in that Week 4 matchup against Josh Allen, 76% zone. It was their highest rate of the season. I'm interested to see what Zach Orr elects to go with this time, right? There's been less splash plays using zone against Josh Allen. We know the touchdown rate has decreased by wide margins. We don't need to get into it again this week, but we were kind of at the forefront of that push and the change that Zach Orr made defensively with moving Humphrey to the slot exclusively, moving Kyle Hamilton to safety, kind of going with a twofold green dot situation where Hamilton gets the play relayed to him, and he's making sure everyone is lined up perfectly. That wasn't the case in the second half. We saw Pittsburgh's deep downfield passing attack give the Ravens some trouble. It was an obvious dot that was thrown to Pickens for the touchdown. No defense is going to defend that. But on the other one, to Van Jefferson, I don't know what's going on there. Stevens was horrific in coverage, but Kyle Hamilton was supposed to have help over the top, so there was a communication issue there. There wasn't another receiver anywhere on that side of the field, so to see that explosiveness get to Baltimore was like, hey, it makes you wonder if certainly the changes have helped, but being number one in success rate allowed through the air, being number one in EPA per pass allowed through the air, I think some of that was to do with the changes in scheme, but I also think a lot of it had to do with some of the offenses down the stretch, and I think based upon like how you allocate, change versus schedule is maybe enough to get you over the top if you're someone that says, hey, Baltimore's defense has improved down the stretch because the scheme change, and that's 80%, and it's only 20% of the schedule, you're probably going to find yourself on Baltimore. If you think it's the inverse, you're probably going to find yourself on Buffalo. I think if Josh Allen's going to attack down the field, we did see Keon Coleman at the earlier stage of his rookie season show some signs there against that Ravens defense. Amari Cooper came in and, even though he hasn't been fully implemented yet, Coleman and Cooper are Buffalo's deep play threats. So you'd hope that, you're not playing a phone booth offense this week. If you're a Buffalo fan, you want to see Josh Allen air it out a little bit more, take a couple of those deep shots, focus on Stevens in particular. And if you are going to say, hey, we're going to run the ball here, I would do it from 11, right? Less trying to be the man with the sixth offensive lineman to prove a point here. I think the number's perfect. I really do. Our number on this game on a neutral is Baltimore minus 3.75. Downgrade a little bit for Zay, and then home field advantage. I do think, it's
is this good
accounted for that Baltimore is without Zay, but I do just think naturally, right, when Zay gets announced out on the screen, it's going to probably push closer to pick would be my guess, and then at pick, when we have the entire situation, at that point when we might start to see like the actual stances get taken in this game. And the conversation that I've had is, more mechanical, right? If you can get a 6-point teaser through the 7 with Buffalo, makes sense. If this were to reverse and you can get 7.5 on a teaser with Baltimore, like that makes sense. It's more mechanical as opposed to like the line seems pretty good. There's going to have to be something that transpires on this field matchup-wise that gives someone the edge. And if I trusted McDermott to load the box and play man coverage, and I trusted McDermott to spread this offense out and run from 11 and attack Stevens down the field, I'd feel really great about Buffalo. I just, I don't know what last week was. I really don't know what I watched in that Buffalo game. And they'll come out with a 31-7 win, and everyone will be like, hey, great. I don't know what I saw from either coach in that game.
Well, look, McDermott can dodge some of that criticism with the win on 31-7. Sean Payton mentioning time of possession and all of those other lovely metrics are great. You can take that home with you during the offseason, figuring out, hey, look, maybe we should have thrown more on early downs and allowed our young quarterback to operate from an advantageous position instead of putting him in 3rd and 6, seemingly on rinse and repeat throughout the course of that contest. You mentioned,
the oddity to that game, and we don't need to go too far back, but it's like watch every McDermott game semi-recently, even like the San Francisco game. He plays the 2-high safety. He baits you into running it, and if you can, then he'll make an adjustment. But if you can't, you're still going to get looks that look fantastic to run into.
And it's not going to pay dividends.
And everyone was raving about Denver's offensive line. And I get it. Number 1 in run block win rate. There's a reason there's been like this musical chairs at running back, because the run block win rate doesn't mesh with the actual rush efficiency when you remove Bo Nix from the equation and just look at running back runs. They don't have a good running back. And so you weren't ever going to be able to take advantage of that.
Don't tell that to Sean Payton. That's why he made Audric Estime an inactive and took a guy that hadn't played since week 3. And judging by the reports that we got early on in that broadcast, Tyler Batty was supposed to be the key cog for what Denver wanted to accomplish. I'm not sure if he finished with the amount of touches that I can count on two hands.
I think we talked the week before, too, about there was some... McLaughlin was the guy. He was going to get all the carry. He did get all the carry. He had 16. Went for 39 yards. There's conversation now, and, you obviously hate drafting running backs early, but apparently they're... And we'll see. There's so much time now between now and the draft, but Ashton Genty has kind of been a discussion point there for getting a running back in there. Anyways, back to this guy. Anything else you have? I think it's going to be the funnest game of the weekend on paper going in. Hopefully it transpires that way. There's less I have on this game because it's more about what they should do than what I know they're going to do, right? There's some coaches where, Sean McVay is going to come out here and he's going to load up motion, he's going to load up play action, and that's the only hope you would have against Philadelphia's defense. It's coming. Here, I can tell you what they should do. I don't know if it's coming.
Jerry Jones can't wait to draft a running back in the early portion of the draft because that's the only thing that's held the Cowboys back over the last couple of seasons, right? That is the missing link more so than anything else for Dallas and the way that they'll continue to build their team. Hey, the one question I did want to ask, you mentioned the, where you have the Ravens-Bills game on a neutral, making the adjustment. Of these 4 games, look, we have 4 what should be electric atmospheres. Do you see one home field advantage potentially playing a bigger role, not from a quantitative standpoint, but just from an element and everything else? Do we think it's Detroit inside?
Yeah, you would think it's Detroit with a rookie quarterback, right? Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would think. I just, listening to you talk and us breaking these games down, you think about how hostile these 4 atmospheres can be. And I go through, and it's not coincidence that these are the 4 best teams in the league that are playing at home, and all of them can create, a unique situation to allow them to benefit immensely there. So,
we talked off air, right? And it's the conversation that's, Lamar's going to be playing in the coldest game of his career. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And the Ravens haven't been able to practice outside because their fields are frozen.
So, there's some things here, but the low-hanging fruit would obviously be, Detroit's home field advantage. They're all in, right? This is it. Because you lose Ben Johnson, suddenly you can't pay the entire young nucleus a couple years from now. This is it. This feels like this is all in. And that crowd's going to be raucous, and you have a rookie quarterback. That would be the low-hanging fruit in terms of the most impact a home field advantage would have potentially to one of the quarterbacks in this game. Now, Kansas City has a great home field advantage, but your hope is C.J. Stroud is. To me, if Houston's offense isn't able to get it going, it's just because their offense isn't very good, and Kansas City's defense levels back up to where they were, not they're a touch healthier.
Makes a world of sense, and C.J. Stroud, for the second time in as many years, will go on the road. Played at Baltimore last year, plays at Kansas City. He is clearly getting his feet thrown into the fire if he's going to be their franchise quarterback going forward. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there, most importantly, for all things podcast-related. Be sure to follow the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, as we get into this portion of the season, the markets get considerably more efficient. We did see some movement last week on totals, even on sides. But look, the Denver Broncos appeared to be one of the sharper sides that we had seen, from 9 down to 7.5 on game day. Once that 60 minutes of football in Western New York transpired, it did not prove to be the right side whatsoever. So when you look at the 4 games available, side, total, or another angle that you think is worth taking for us and our listeners?
Yeah, very, very difficult to navigate it this week. There's not a ton out there, right? If you said, listen, there's been some sharp money on the Houston-Kansas City under. It does make me a little nervous that Slowick upped his rate of early down throws in the first half last week, and Kansas City has been getting kind of a bump in this round offensively. We saw the bump down the stretch. When you start to think about Andy Reid having 2 weeks with Hopkins and Worthy and Hollywood Brown, and it's different right now, I think, for their offense. So I haven't joined the under party that's come in there. The Rams team total under might be somewhat interesting if Nakobe Dean was there and it was around a key. I think the number's pretty bang-on accurate here in Baltimore-Buffalo pre-snap. Obviously, if something odd transpires after the game, so I'm going to be like, oh, there's a ton of value in this game. But pre-flop, it's certainly a tight number. I mean, even our total in that was we were at 50.9, and it's basically 51.25. So it's pretty close there, and I think that game has the potential to get squirrely if Buffalo takes the right approach. So, I mean, it's pretty square, but I also think, a lot of times when we talk about teasers, and Baltimore was one of those examples where it's either side you're getting 1.5, you're going to throw them in a teaser because it's mechanical, right? For me, when I look at Kansas City and I look at Detroit, I would be willing to lay 7 in both those instances. And so I think maybe gravitating towards a teaser for those two legs is probably the best way to go about this. We can, to make sure we clear the threes and make it an actual advantage teaser, we'll use a 7-pointer. We'll call it -145. Teasing the Chiefs down, it's mixed between 8 and 8.5. So we'll take the worst of it. We'll call it 1.5 on Kansas City. We'll call it 2.5 on Detroit. 7-point teaser -145.
Yep, that works. I think. Look, as you're trying to find angles that are worth attacking, we know that the runway continues to get shorter from a betting perspective. With only 7 meaningful NFL games still to go. Of course, the College Football National Championship on Monday, so you have to look through hell or high water, try and leave no stone unturned to try and find angles, and I think the teaser in this particular spot with those two favorites makes a world of sense, even if it doesn't typically fit our DNA, trying to make a case for some of the dogs. I think it's the best value that's out there, and expect both favorites to win quite comfortably against inferior opponents and move on to the conference championship games.
Yeah, with 2 games next week, if we don't love something, maybe we'll gravitate towards a prop. We record these things Thursday morning. I don't necessarily love going on props that aren't on game day, just from a market liquidity standpoint. However,
a little bit more liquid this time of year, at least.
It is, and there's certainly some folks that seem to be
some folks
itching and scratching
folks?
on Tuesday.
I think there's more than some folks.
Ooh, got to inflate the record or catch up with those Tuesday 3-unit props.
Anything else you'd like to add?
$473 on clean accounts, and then they'll come in on game day with the 6-figure market and do a half-unit side. It'll be interesting. So,
oh Lord, yeah, this won't create any blowback in your world.
It's maddening to watch. I mean, just behave like a normal human.
Behaving like normal humans
right.
Doesn't really happen these days, especially in this particular space.
It does.
Anything else?
All right, let's get out of here. No, somehow, Jesus Christ, we went over
4 games, about 15 minutes apiece, some bullshit at the front, some bullshit at the back, a little best bet, and the perfect recipe to try and keep people entertained.
Yeah. You mentioned Hell or High Water. Watched that again the other day. What a really good movie.
I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
Again. Taylor Sheridan. That guy's just coming up.
Did you finish season 1 of Landman?
Not yet. And I had to refrain from Brad divulge. He's like, hey, there's a good character that comes up in the season finale. I'm like, I don't want to hear about it. Hear about it. I'm behind.
It's football season. Just because it's over for BP on the college front, and he's already kicking back with his feet up for Notre Dame, Ohio State until we get the breakdown tomorrow. So the rest of us still have a little bit of work to do.
So, he was saying he was not betting as many early win totals next season as this season, and that's already gone out the window.
I can't.
You'll
have to bust.
We'll wait to bust his balls.
Yeah, you'll have
tomorrow.
to bust his balls on that tomorrow. Then
I did give him one, and he said, "Hey, I sent that to you yesterday." I said, "No, you didn't." He goes, "Oh, I sent it to someone else." I said, "Yeah, we've been on one in particular." And he goes, "Oh, that's actually my favorite one."
Look at you guys betting win totals already.
Just one.
Look.
Just one. Because it is. You know what? We'll save it for tomorrow because I'll get blowback if it ends up losing.
No, we'll save it for tomorrow.
Tomorrow, right?
Yep.
We're doing the national championship. We're giving it the weekend
Hopefully
to breathe.
Monday by lunchtime, so folks will have plenty of Saturday, Sunday, and of course all day Monday to digest that for the big game coming to you from Atlanta. So for Payne Insider, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck with all of your NFL Divisional Round investments. Most importantly, with a little Saturday teaser two-step with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Lions in that old portfolio. We'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.